What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a movie. Rise of the Guardians. This movie came out in, I think, 2012. It has the voice talent of Chris Pine, Alec Baldwin, Hugh Jackman, Isla Fisher, and Jude Law. And this story is about Jack Frost, who is this elemental being, and he is asked to join the Guardians, which is Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Sandman, and the Tooth Fairy. And their job is to protect kids slash make them believe. And then you've got the bad guy, who is the Boogeyman, and he wants them to stop believing in the Guardians and start believing in him slash start fearing him. And so the Guardians want to stop the Boogeyman, and then Jack Frost, he wants to get his memories back because the Tooth Fairy tells him that before any of them became what they are now, they all had previous lives, and they all remember their previous lives except for Jack Frost. So at first, he doesn't really want to be a Guardian, he just wants to find out who he was before, but he helps them so that he can get his memories back, and then throughout the movie, he also has to find out what his center is. At one point, Santa Claus tells him, you need to find out what your center is so that you can find out who you want to be, what you want your role to be. And so his character arc is trying to find out what his center is while he's helping the Guardians do this thing. And there are a lot of things about this movie that I really like. I really like the visuals. I think that the animation is top-notch in this movie. These days, pretty much any studio is going to produce more or less really good animation. It's not just Disney Pixar. This is a DreamWorks movie, and I think the animation here is just as good as anything that DreamWorks or anything that Disney or Pixar has done in the past. So I think the animation here is really good. I think that most of the characters here are portrayed very interestingly. I really like the characters of Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, the Tooth Fairy. I even like the Boogeyman, played by Jude Law. I think that his characterization is very tragic. He comes from a very believable place. His motivation is very understandable. You sympathize for him, but at the same time, like most sympathetic villains, he goes a little bit too far, and then you're like, okay, now I'm no longer sympathizing with him. Now I'm rooting for the good guys. And that kind of brings me to one of my first complaints. That is Jack Frost himself. I do not like or care about Jack Frost here. And there are times where I really do sympathize for Jack Frost. The fact that he doesn't know anything about himself and nobody can see him, like as soon as he wakes up, he's like really happy and energetic, and he's like, yeah, I'm so excited, I can make things freeze. And then he goes into this small village and nobody can see him. That is going to have a toll on someone psychologically. And he's like this for 300 years. He goes around and nobody can see him except for these other Guardians. And we get the feeling that at least some of these guys have met him before. Like the Easter Bunny seems to have some kind of business with Jack from 1968. So some of these guys have met him before, but none of them seem to be on really good terms with Jack. But despite that, despite feeling sorry for him, he is very immature, very reckless, and just doesn't really want to take any responsibility at all. And the only reason he does most of what he does in this movie is so that he can get his memories back. Ultimately, he's a very selfish character. Very late in the movie, he becomes a little bit more selfless. He's willing to do stuff, not so much to get his memories back, but just because suddenly it's time for him to start acting heroic, and it doesn't really feel earned. Also, there's like one part in this movie where he does something, there's actually two parts in this movie where he is just very, I don't know what the word I'm looking for here is, he's not acting very intelligent. He's not using his brain. At one point, he is making things frosty in this little town, and this kid is sledding all throughout the road, a very busy intersection, I might add, where cars are going everywhere, and Jack Frost is like, oh, this is fun, I'm making this kid happy because he's sledding all over the place. And then this giant sofa comes out of this box truck and hits this kid in the head, and the kid is like, oh, I'm okay, my tooth came out, now the Tooth Fairy's gonna give me money. And Jack is like, hey, come on, that was me, that wasn't the Tooth Fairy. And he's acting very selfish and just kind of bratty. And I'm thinking, yeah, you did this, you almost killed that kid with this sofa hitting him in the head. And then at one point, they're in that kid's room, all of the Guardians, and then basically his actions put all of the Guardians to sleep except for him and the Sandman. And then the Sandman almost gets killed. He doesn't, because this movie can't take risks like that. They can't kill one of their main characters, so they bring him back at the end of the movie. But Jack basically almost gets the Sandman killed because of his immaturity earlier in the movie, where he puts the other Guardians to sleep, so they're not able to do anything to help him and the Sandman whenever they're trying to fight the Boogeyman. So the character of Jack himself is one that I don't really care about. There are times where I feel very sorry for him, but ultimately I don't feel like his character is one that I can really appreciate like some of the other characters in this movie. Another part of this movie that I don't really like is that it is very low on substance. This movie clocks in at just a little under an hour and a half long, and the first 35 minutes of this movie do not have any story at all. There is basically, for the first 35 minutes, it's introducing characters, it's setting up this world, but the story itself does not come into play until about 35 minutes into the movie. That's right around the point where the Guardians are like, hey Jack, do you want to come with us? And then he's like, okay, and then he kind of gets sucked into the story. Again, about 35 minutes into the film. Story is not everything. If you compensate for lack of story by having really strong character work and really interesting visuals and themes and stuff like that, it's okay if you don't have as much story, but you need to compensate with it for something else. And I don't think that this movie actually does that. Some of these characters I really like, but ultimately I don't think that this movie makes up for not having very much plot in the first third of the film. Also, this movie has a group of kids, and they become very important in the climax of the movie, because throughout the film, some of them, they believe in like the Easter Bunny and the Tooth Fairy. They believe in these things, but then about halfway into the movie, suddenly it's like, we don't believe in stuff like that. We have nightmares now, and we don't believe in anything like that. And then at the end of the movie, it's like, yay, we believe again, and we're going to help the Guardians defeat the bad guy. And these kids do not have any personality at all. None of them are developed in any way. There's only 2 or 3 of them that actually have names, and there's like 6 or 7 kids. The rest of them don't even have names given during the movie, and none of them have any personality or character development, except for one of them. And these kids play way too much of an important role in this movie to be not that developed at all. They either need to be not in this movie at all if they're not going to be that developed, or if they are going to be in this movie and they're going to have an important role in this movie, then they need to have actual personality and character traits. They don't need to just be bland vessels to make the plot move forward, which is what they do. Ultimately, you might be saying that I'm being really too hard on this movie, and that it's a kid's movie, it's okay if it does some stuff wrong, because who cares, it's just a kid's movie. I would say there are kids' movies out there that are much smarter and better films than this. Animated movies, I would say How to Train Your Dragon, Shrek, Chicken Run, all of those movies I'm pretty sure are from DreamWorks. All those movies are better films than Rise of the Guardians. Again, it's going to feel like I'm very harsh. I really wanted to love this movie when I went into it. I was really enjoying myself for the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then about 35 minutes in, I was thinking, okay, when is the plot going to happen? And then it starts to happen, and then by that point, I'm kind of like, okay, I like this, this, and this, but I really don't like this, this, and that. There's a lot to like about this movie, but there's also quite a bit that just does not work for me. So unfortunately, I do not rate Rise of the Guardians very highly. If I did numberings, I wouldn't give it a very high number. I don't do number ratings, but overall, I would say if you see it cheap somewhere, you could go ahead and buy it, but don't go into this expecting a really great animated film, or even just a really great film. I've seen better films before than this, unfortunately. So those are my thoughts on Rise of the Guardians. I hope that you guys liked this review. If you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back in the future with more videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.